going to share my screen. This is not what you're most excited about, but this one is the most exciting. Just give me a second to put it in slideshow. So again, welcome to Working Across Cultures, a cultural humility approach. This is my email. You have it. I emailed you all the link, and then our class website I'll show you in a little bit. And to start off, I want to tell you, I teach English to refugees and parolees. And when I told somebody that, and when I was first told, oh yeah, it's a class for refugees and parolees, I thought, what? Why do they mix refugees with people getting out of jail? Like, okay, sure, I can teach that class. But I learned a new definition of parolee. And that is simply somebody that's on a fast track to get refugee status. My Ukrainian students, they don't necessarily want to wait the 2 years to go through the whole application process and vetting and interviewing. And so they get a fast track, and then they do a lot of it here. And Sue could tell us a lot more about that since she knows more about that. But anyway, so parolee in my mind is a refugee, fast track refugee. It's the simplified way to put it. I'm gonna slideshow it. So I work with refugees, asylum seekers, parolees, not internally displaced persons, and immigrants. So internally displaced persons would be people, a lot of our students have family who's displaced, but they're still in their country, but not where they would like to be. So a little bit about me. I work at Clark College, and I'm also on the board for Portland Literacy Council, and I run the Portland ESL Network website where we map out where all the classes are in Portland, Washington County, and Vancouver. So the first activity, your first homework, your first job today is to think and then discuss in small groups. So we're going to do breakout sections, which will probably only have 2 groups since we're so small. But I want to know, and I want you to think, what would you bring if you were fleeing your country with only a carry-on? This guy's not necessarily getting on an airplane, but he has a nice carry-on that rolls. But just think about, what would you bring if you were leaving your country and you could just bring a carry-on? So in our breakout rooms, first I want you to introduce yourself. You can say where you tutor, since we might not have memorized the chat. What would you bring if you were fleeing your country, which is a carry-on? And then the last question is, what do you highly value that you would have to leave behind? So there's things that you really value. You can't put it in your carry-on. You're not going to be able to bring it with you to that. I'm going to stop the share. I'll put the questions in the chat, but I have to stop the share so that I can break us into breakout rooms. Okay, so I'm going to start breakout rooms. Okay, who can repeat the questions that we're supposed to say or talk about, discuss? All right, Deborah.
Introduce ourselves, what we would bring in our carry-on, and what would we have to leave behind.
Perfect.
That is value to us.
Right, great. Okay, so I'm just going to create 2 breakout rooms, and when you see the prompt, go ahead and push join. Recording. All right, so did you finish the conversations? All right, so what are some things that
I just have to duck
stood out?
out for 1 minute. I'll be
Okay,
right back.
no problem. What were some things that stood out that people would bring and leave? If you want, you can share in the chat or out loud.
In my group, I thought Deborah had a really good idea to, because I mentioned bringing documents with me, and she suggested a thumb drive instead of documents, because obviously it takes up less room. So I thought that was just, a great idea, assuming you can find technology to, plug it in.
Yeah, I emailed myself a picture of my passport, driver's license in case my stuff got stolen when I traveled. That's good. Yeah. Documents and losing those is such a hassle. Anybody else?
In our group, oh, sorry, do you want to talk, Gina?
Go ahead, Brandy.
Okay.
In the same
In
group.
in our group, we had two different schools of thought. One was technology and passports, and the other was medicine, and food.
And
I
shoes.
thought I need my
Shoes.
glasses or
Yeah,
my
so there's
contacts. Yeah.
two of us that said passport, laptop, phone, and underwear. And then the other group was like, stuff it full of all the medication you can think of and some shoes and leave it all behind.
Yeah, although
Shoes, yeah.
I realized I'm so used to my technology, I didn't even think that. I just assumed I would bring it, Brandy.
Yeah.
Oh.
Don't forget your chargers.
It's attached to your body, right?
Right, yeah. Pamela said a pillow and a blanket, and I was like, yeah, if you're
yeah.
traveling, if you're fleeing, you want to sleep, you're already kind of totally stressed and going insane. If you can sleep, it'd be great to do that. Yeah, so I asked this question just for a few reasons, but one of them is because that question came up. And in my class once, one of my students was showing her shoes off. She's like, I brought these from Ukraine. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a special attachment to those shoes. She loved them. She brought them from Ukraine. So it's a memory, a souvenir, but souvenir from home. But that's one of the things that I just overheard somebody had brought. And then I remember a family from Iraq, and the daughter was so sad. She could not bring her nail polish collection. And I only found this out because we'd given her nail polish for her birthday. And she was so excited. And her mom was like, yeah, she didn't get to bring her nail polish. So I was like, wow, would people put in a suitcase? And that daughter would have put nail polish, but the parents nixed to that idea. So yeah. Any other thoughts or comments? So now you'll just have to speak up because as I share, I can't necessarily see everyone's face. Yeah, so we're going to talk about both cross-cultural competence and cultural humility. So to start out with, I'm going to read you the definition of cross-cultural competence, and that's because we're going to be comparing it to cultural humility as well. But I love cross-cultural competence. It's the ability to interact effectively with people of various racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, religious, and social groups. And you're working towards cultural competence. It's an ongoing process, one often tackled by learning about the patterns of behavior, beliefs, language, and values and customs of a particular group. So you're learning, you're studying, you're learning about different groups. And with that knowledge, you're able to interact with people from different cultures. So we're at the airport, it's customs. You just got to the US, or you just got to wherever you are, and there's people from all over the world. How would you approach this with cultural competence? And first of all, what do you see going on here?
Hand is in Japanese Chinese style, and the guy is not understanding that's what he's doing.
Right. Yeah. So in Japan, in China, in a lot of Asian, I don't know how many Asian countries, but you greet with your business card. The last one guy said he was taught in Japan and he had to teach how to shake hands because the greeting is you can greet with business cards. What else do you see happening?
And he's bowing,
He's
Yep.
bowing.
right? And it's custom to take not one but two business cards and go, ooh, ah. Can I have another one for my friend?
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yes.
So you're supposed to ask for it.
Yes. I used to
So
live
that way,
in Taiwan.
like, oh, wow. Okay, so that's Taiwan in this group too. Yeah. Mhm.
So what's going on with this woman who's invading some personal space?
Mhm.
She's the
Yeah.
American.
Yeah.
She's American. She's from a country. I never thought of this, but in Latin America, we can kiss each other's cheeks to greet.
Then also, the Egyptian culture is very, very face to face. They get up right up close when they speak.
Interesting. Yeah. So this man, he has some personal space. He's feeling a little invaded. This man's, I'm next. What should I do? So it seems like everybody is having some thoughts, a little bit confused. Nobody knows what to do. So with cross-cultural competence, you're going to read up on all the different countries. Yeah, okay, in Japan, okay, I'm grabbing this with two hands. In this lady's culture, maybe we'll say she wants to greet you by kissing you on the cheek. We don't know what this man's, how he would greet, and this man, maybe with the namaste, I'm not sure. But everyone is having different ideas, different thoughts, and different ways to greet people. So this is showing you, wow, everyone has different cultures, different ways to greet people, and you can't necessarily know it all. And so that's where cultural humility comes in. And cultural humility is more about learning the different, actually asking questions, getting to know, and being sensitive to everyone's different styles. But at the same time, you might not know what to do automatically. So you would be figuring that out. Cultural humility, the definition, a personal lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture, but starts with an examination of his or her own values, beliefs, and cultural identities. It also recognizes the power dynamics and imbalances and desires to fix those imbalances and develop partnerships with people and groups who advocate for others. So the initial activity, thinking about what would we bring with us and what do we value that we'd have to leave home, is just a way to start evaluating our own culture, our own values, and our own cultural identities. Apparently mine is, oh yeah, a blanket's a great idea. I value sleeping. We value rest. So that's just the definition of cultural humility. And so traits, openness, self-reflection, awareness, lifelong learning. So you'd be in the airport learning all those ways to greet, empathy and compassion, to be others oriented. And a big one is acknowledging the power imbalances and balancing power. And so you're not only acknowledging them, but you're trying to balance the power imbalances. Any questions or comments? All right. Cultural humility says it's the best because you're open, it's a lifelong commitment. Cultural competence is you're supposed to kind of learn all the customs, but they say cultural humility, people say, well, cultural competence is you're working towards cultural competence. It's an ongoing process, one tackled by learning about the patterns and behaviors. So the key word is you need to learn about the patterns and behaviors, beliefs, language, values, customs of a particular group or particular groups. So cultural humility says, well, it's impossible to have learned all of those ahead of time. So we're going to go about learning it together. And so they're very similar, they overlap. And you do have to have some cultural competence for cultural humility. However, you can't possibly memorize every single thing in every single culture. And that doesn't allow for different people are different. And so I say we study cultural competence under the umbrella of cultural humility. And so I have a few examples here of cultural competence. This is, let's see, oh, it does make it big. The body and language gestures. So learning different body language, nonverbal communication. And so this is something that we can teach our students and we can also learn from them. Like, what is this man? This man, number 5, he has both fingers crossed. What do you
Making a
think
wish.
that means?
He's making a wish. in our culture.
Right here, making a wish. Yeah. So if you see someone that's like, oh, I hope if I cross my fingers, it's gonna happen. Peace. Peace. Which one would be peace?
Number 8.
Number 8, peace. So he has the peace sign, yeah. So we have point. So anyway, this is just something that is something that Americans do. So we can, doing this with our students, we also become aware of our own culture, our own nonverbal communications. But this 24 American customs, this one's really interesting. 24 American customs that are considered offensive in other countries. And so maybe we haven't read this article, and we don't know what's offending other people. So having the cultural humility, just being able to ask, in my country, we greet with a handshake. How do you guys greet in your country? Tipping. So when you're tipping, say, don't just assume it's the same as in the United States, which is hard to understand as well. But tipping in Japan and South Korea, let me make this a little bigger, is seen as an insult. I didn't know that. And I don't know, Gina, you've lived in Japan, is that correct? Or is anybody else lived in Japan? Do you know if this is true? Is tipping offensive?
I don't think it's offensive. My teaching assistant is currently living in Japan. And the way she explained to me is they just don't have that.
No, yeah. They'd be like,
It's
what
true
is
in-
this?
She did, but she's also said that a lot of Western and American customs are starting to infiltrate their culture, and tipping actually is one of the things that she's seeing there for the first time.
Yeah,
When
I
she
mean, if
lived
you have a
there-
business, why not start that?
Yeah, before she came to the US, 'cause she's Japanese, before she came to the US, there was no tipping. And just in the 3 years that she was here, it started to change. She was really surprised when she went back at how, and she's more aware of Western customs, so she's noticing them also.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah.
I tutored South Korean students in LA. And I mean, it's not tipping, but they always were bringing me little gifts, and it really was uncomfortable to me. Things
Yeah.
like socks, or just odd little tchotchke. Anyway.
Yeah, but it's part of their culture. They want to offer the
To their
gifts
teacher. Yeah.
to the teacher. Oh, interesting. Yeah. I have noticed people laughing with your mouth open in Japan. I noticed students, lots of students will cover their mouth. Being fashionably late is unacceptable in some countries, like Germany.
Mhm.
And I think it depends on personalities too. Having one hand in your pocket is considered arrogant in Turkey. Being on time in Latin America is pretty normal, or being on time is not as normal. You don't want to show up to dinner party on time. Unless in Mexico, my friends would say, oh, you got here in time to sweep the floor. Like, oh, they came to sweep. That meant, oh, you're early or on time. So anyway, these are really interesting. Just the different things that you can learn. I have heard of showing the soles of your feet not being a good idea. Interesting. Keeping your shoes on, keeping your shoes off, you never know. So every country is a little bit different. Yeah. Any other comments about this one? So I'm not going to teach them all to you, but I am giving you this link on the class website. So you can read it. It's interesting. You're not necessarily going to all those countries, but it does help us understand our students when they do something like, oh, they keep giving me gifts that I may or may not want. And we feel like, wow, am I taking advantage of the student? What am I going to do with this? We don't want them to be spending too much money on us, but for them, it's an important part of their culture to give gifts. All right. Now we have a scenario. And we're going to think about why this could be. So it's new student orientation. On campus, the International Student Club organized a meet and greet for all international students and university administrators. Nadia is a Muslim student from Kuwait who has just arrived to the US to study engineering. Alex works in the fundraising department, and he sees Nadia standing alone and wants to welcome her and introduce her to others at the event. He goes to talk to her and offers his hand for her to shake. Nadia looks hesitant, but she shakes his hand. So why did she react this way?
I would guess D.
She didn't feel comfortable shaking Jim's hand. That's short and sweet. She was shy and did not want to interact with the rest of the group. So bully, but she went to the orientation. She's a strict Muslim and does not like interacting or talking to men. She's worried about whether Jim washed his hands or not. Any of these could be true, right? Any of them could be true. Or maybe it was COVID and Jim forgot. She did not feel comfortable shaking Jim's hand. I guess would be the best answer and most likely answer. So, is there any thoughts? Has anyone experienced anything like this before?
Yes, my daughter was an exchange student in Turkey. And when I went to the first orientation, there was a young man and I held out my hand and he wouldn't shake my hand.
I had a similar experience with clients from Somalia when I was practicing immigration law, and I quickly learned, and they
Yeah.
were pretty polite about it. It was like, we just don't do that.
Yeah.
Is there a general way to greet people without crossing the line with all these different taboos if you don't know what they are?
Smile and a nod.
Mm-hmm.
But that could seem rude to somebody if you're not, I mean, I don't see that Alex is in error here because in his
Right,
culture, offering his hand, but you don't want to make somebody feel uncomfortable. So what would have been the appropriate thing, culturally appropriate thing for him to do?
Well, I think we could argue about that because this meeting is taking place in the United States and this student has come because of an interest in the United States, presumably. And pretty much in our culture, we shake hands. So that is an appropriate welcome, one could argue.
Yeah,
Just,
I think
just for the sake of argument.
Pamela
But,
has
well,
a point. Yeah.
But you're also never gonna you're never gonna catch everything. And you can only hope that you aren't gonna seriously offend someone because people will respond and either not do it or like someone was saying, say I'm sorry, we don't do that, or it goes both ways, I guess. And you just have to not take offense.
I think
Gina?
if you're in their country, you don't necessarily want to be extending your hand to shake hands if you don't know what the customs are. But if a person is in a country where that's the custom, that's how we learn what to expect, kissing each other on both cheeks or whatever it is.
Gina, did you have a comment?
Because actually have a particular issue.
No.
With this Toastmaster class, and we learned that men and women never in power. And what I've learned in the 30 years I've been working with immigrants is, in general, if a culture is more conservative, I just have a personal rule that I never touch those people. Even in a friendly American gesture, once I've had them as a student for a while, then I will teach them American culture. That's my job in my class, but I never do it until they're comfortable. We have to remember many people are in this country against their will. And then forcing our cultures on them right away is really, really hard for them. And that's why they drop out of our programs. And the hand touching is a really big one in most of the Muslim world, from what I've been told by Muslims.
Yep.
And in the Toastmasters, you know, it is American culture to handshake with Toastmasters. And in this group, they never, ever, ever did that.
Interesting. Yeah.
And they explained why. And they're like, just when you're in our spaces, don't, you know, and somebody opposite.
All right. We caught most of what you said, Gina, but some of it was cutting out. But yeah, I like the concept of, if you know this is a conservative culture, especially when you suspect if they're from a Muslim country, you suspect they might be Muslims, then start out. One teacher or somebody said, I can do the handshake wave. You can put your hand out there and then realize that's not gonna fly. And then you do the wave, the handshake wave. Okay, but we're actually gonna talk more about this and what to do as we go on throughout this.
Yeah, the handshake thing isn't just Muslims. A lot of Buddhists don't touch people they don't know either.
Interesting, yeah.
Or so it's been explained to me.
Yeah. And so, yeah, as you get to know your students, you're teaching them more American culture, they're getting more comfortable, and you guys can kind of navigate it. But so part 1 of cultural humility, self-reflection, take time to reflect on your own culture, background, biases, assumptions. So we think, okay, maybe I think it's only Muslims that don't shake hands. Why doesn't this person want to? Oh, it's also other people. But I'm taking time to reflect on my own culture. In my culture, we shake hands, and we don't just shake hands. We like have a nice firm handshake, and we look each other in the eye and smile and say, nice to meet you. And so I'm assuming that that's normal. Feels pretty normal to me. It's been that way my whole life until you go somewhere else or meet someone from a different culture. So consider how your background may influence your perceptions and interactions with people from different cultures. And we're going to talk about that with the iceberg model. This actually, just bringing this up, I think I do it in most of the workshops because it's so important. So you can see the iceberg, you see the top 10%, it's above the water. But look at all of this below the water. Maybe one of my next workshops, we should go to see some icebergs in real life. Yeah. So there's so much below the water. And so the iceberg concept of culture is where you can see surface culture. Here it's called surface culture. It's most easily seen. And those would be things that I think of if you're driving down the road, this is what you can see. So I have a student from Togo, and I want to think about, okay, if I went to her culture, what would I see as I drive down the road in Togo? The arts, maybe I would see literature, drama, classical music. I would hear things. I would see maybe what type of dancing they do, if I could see them dancing, what games kids are playing, or adults. I would see the food, the cooking, what people are wearing. I would see the architecture. And I'd also see the geography and how that plays into their culture. Now, shallow culture, these are the unspoken rules. And if they're broken, then there's more emotional level to that. So notions of modesty, conception of beauty, cosmetology, conception of justice, courtship practices. This is stuff that you might see some of it, courtship, but you might not, and you might not understand all of it just by driving down the road and seeing it. It's a little below the surface. You can't necessarily see it. And if somebody does something, notions of modesty, if they break that and they go beyond the norm, my emotional level is going to be a lot higher than if they just wear a different clothing that's not the dress. That's kind of, okay, that's a different dress than we usually use, but they're still modest. And so I'm not going to spend much emotional time on this dress, but the modesty thing, I might just get a little annoyed or be very uncomfortable. And then as you go down, you get to the deeper culture. And these are unconscious rules that I might not know that I value, that it's part of my culture. It's just always been that way from my family, from my surroundings growing up. And if they are broken, I'm gonna be really bothered. My emotions will be kind of like, wait, something is wrong, something's going on. So one, it'd be the concept of space. So the lady in the airport that's really close to the man. And so that's something that I have to teach my children. So that's going to be in the shallow culture. Like, I know I'm kind of aware of it. It's going to be up here more like, okay, it's broken. It's something that I have to teach rather than that they just see, because I do have to teach that to my children. But they're not, if somebody's too close, they're not going to be like intensely emotional, but they could be like, whoa, I'm a bit emotional, give me some space. Can you guys think of other things that would be like a deep culture, something that we might not be aware of in our culture that is highly emotional? What about cheating?
Religious practice.
Religious practice. Yeah. So you can see some aspects of religious practice, but there's so much more that is deeper and not seen. And if somebody's going and changing that or doing it different, then wait, I can't do this. This is not what I believe. Yeah.
And the preference for competition or cooperation is so fundamental. I don't think we see that in ourselves. And but if you live in Thailand, harmony is the highest or most fundamental, I guess, the most fundamental value. So if you cry at the wedding, that's wrong, because you should be happy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So so there are things that are very shocking to us, I think, but that harmony, smiling at an event that's boring you to tears, of course you must do that.
Oh, interesting.
Another one might be the connection to nature and the natural environment is a
Yeah,
lot more important to some cultures than others.
definitely. Interesting. Yeah, the ones that I thought like cheating, stealing, lying, those are kind
What
of
about discussing politics
discussing
Uh-oh.
politics.
or
Yeah, that-
just mentioning it? I don't know.
Yeah.
I do know from living overseas, I'm hyper aware of my culture more because in where I lived in Taiwan, when you first meet someone, they say, "Are you married? How much do you weigh? Oh my God, you're fat. And how much money do you make?"
How much do you make? Yes, how much do
Yeah,
you
that's what I was gonna say. In
So
Peru,
that's
it's
right.
really common to ask how much money,
Mhm.
Yeah.
how much money do you make? India too.
Yeah, yeah. But first off, never met you before. They want to know
Yep.
my weight, my age,
Yeah.
and my marital status.
Yeah, and that's something that as a teacher, I feel like I end up mentioning a lot. Actually, we don't ask people that question in the United States, but you can in this class, but we don't ask, but don't ask other people. That's usually how I'll handle that. Because usually I don't mind that. Well, maybe not how much am I getting paid to teach them, but
Yeah, that's
that one is too deep in my iceberg.
well, so you don't know what kind of means they have, so you don't want to be telling them how much you're making.
Yes, could be offending. Yeah. So anyway, I just really like this iceberg model. And what I want you guys to take away from this is when there is some sort of cross-cultural bump or conflict, think about why am I upset? And I think finding it on your cultural iceberg, naming it like, okay, it's because they're not handling their emotions the way that I am used to, and that's deeper. They're handling their emotions a different way, or their physical space, their something, where is this cultural and bump going on? And you're reflecting it on your culture. And then the part on the left side here, like how emotional, if you're more emotional, then maybe that's something you really valued and you didn't realize that that's not necessarily a value in their culture. And so I think it's very interesting. And we'll continue to talk about this some more. But for now, I'm going to go to the next slide. What do you guys see here?
That in Germany or wherever, what country we're looking at there, no is no, but for Americans, no, maybe no, but maybe yes.
Maybe, yeah. Well, so this could be more cross-cultural competence because we're doing a little more generalization. And we do have to preface that, you know, this is a German flag and he is just saying 9. And this guy looks like he's beating around the bush, and this is an American flag. So maybe in general, Americans might beat around the bush, be a little less direct, and maybe Germans are more direct. Now, is every single American like that and every single German like that? Absolutely not. So we do always have to be careful about stereotyping. However, this is a really good way to look at, like, okay, some people, some cultures are very direct. And sometimes people might get to the same words, but it's going to take them a lot longer. They're going to say, well, I don't really want to offend you. So yeah, but then this is happening. And so I think this is just a great visual to show the difference between those two.
I have a perfect example of that. When I was in Germany for several months, I was staying with some people and they had a washing machine. I'd been traveling a long time. And I said, oh, you have a washing machine. It would be great to get some laundry done. You know, waiting for the invitation to do my laundry. And I did that a couple of times. And I finally asked my friend, I said, you know, I kind of mentioned it to your mom a couple times. She goes, do you want to do laundry? I said, well, yes. And she goes, well, you just have to say, can I do laundry?
Right,
don't
we
need the
wouldn't.
beating around the bush. And to me, that would be pushy, you know, to go into somebody, a host's home and say, hi, can I do my laundry? You know, that was not in my
interesting.
repertoire. Yeah. So
And
it
when
goes,
you say that, I don't even think of that as beating around the bush. I think of that's a polite way to mention.
no,
So,
they said, oh yeah,
yeah.
you see, you indicated that it would be nice to do laundry, but apparently you didn't want to, or you would have said, I want to do my laundry.
Interesting.
So
Thanks for sharing.
it's, yeah.
Yeah, I found the challenging as an immigration lawyer, because in many Latin American cultures, particularly given the status difference between myself and a client, and you want answers and you want them quickly. You know, we've got to, let's do this interview, you know. And at first it drove me nuts that people would just kind of beat around the bush. Well, it really wasn't the way it happened. And it took a long time to back off from my understanding of a relationship with a client to say it's going to be different, because these are folks that have different ideas about telling their stories than I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And what something else Sue said, like it's a lawyer. She's a lawyer. You need to time is money. We'll talk about that. But
Yeah, we don't
it's
have all
more-
day, you know.
yeah, you don't have all day. She has a lot of different clients, different people to work with. So she doesn't have all day. And so that's also a subculture. Lawyers, and sometimes lawyers are more direct because they don't have all day. They have a lot that, especially, so maybe she's less direct in one setting and more direct in another. And so this man pictured, the American man, maybe isn't a lawyer, or if he is, he's one that the German man would probably be pretty annoyed with. All right, culture shock is the second kind of part. This is interesting because a lot of our students aren't aware of culture shock, and it's something that I learned when I was young and did study abroad and came back. But culture shock is uh when when somebody's coming into a new culture, and this could be, it's generally coming to a different country, but it could also be in a different subculture in the same country. The happiness and time. So refugee, they're getting ready, an immigrant, they're coming to the United States. Oh, yay, I'm super happy. So here's the happiness line. Everything is new and interesting. I made it. I've been working for this day for years, and now I'm in the States. I'm super happy. And then number two, a little bit later on the time scale, the happiness drops. Differences of the new culture become apparent and frustrating. Oh, yes. Oh, shoot. I guess I don't speak English as much, or everyone speaks way faster than I thought they would. Or their accent is different than I learned online. And I need to find a job, and I don't know how to do that. So there's so many things that all of a sudden, this is tough coming to the different country. And then down the line, cultural differences and challenges are mastered. They've taken my nonverbal communication class, and the teachers have told them, hey, probably don't, ask people their age and how much you'll make if you're interviewing, or if you're applying for a job, how much will I make before you ask other questions. And so they're learning the laws of the land. The unconscious rules of the culture become understood. They're learning, okay, I shouldn't get that close to them to greet them. I'll give them a little bit more space. I won't be offended if they don't take my business cards. And then it doesn't always stay, okay, I just learned it, now I know it. There's still some ups and downs that come and go. The strangeness of a new culture truly hits home. And eventually you're going to get acceptance and adjustments. There's still going to be ups and downs a little bit. And we can also experience this when we are working with our English language learners. Yay, it's my first day. I'm tutoring. I have a new student. They're amazing. But then you're like, shoot, they're late, or they keep canceling, and they are also sitting way too close to me. I don't know any of those things on the iceberg. But the new culture, or being with somebody that you have your culture and they have theirs, and there's two cultures coming together, there's going to be differences. And I call those culture bumps, the bumps. And that can be difficult. But eventually, don't worry, you're going to master some of those challenges. You're going to understand and your new norms. And then you're going to accept it. So you won't always be excited as your first day, but sometimes. Any comments about the culture shock? I feel like it's something that's really valuable to teach your language learners as well, that they're not always aware of, but it helps them, they can identify what they're going through. However, I kept this in, for you guys to know this could be happening to your students. So they could, if you get them one day, they could be on a down day and seem upset or not be able to retain or remember as much of the English that you taught them the last week. But they're going through a lot of stuff. And so I remember, okay, they could be on a number 2 day where difference of the cultures, it's frustrating and they have a lot going on. Okay, poll time. I'm going to start a poll in a few minutes and we're all going to answer. The poll is going to have 5 questions. And so you'll probably have to scroll down on your computer, but you'll be able to answer these questions. And these are the ones on the poll. So I'm stopped sharing and then I'll pull up the poll and those same questions will be on it. And I'm going to launch it. And now you can just answer the questions on your computer. All right, I think everyone answered, so I'm going to share the results. Have you traveled? So, oh, everyone's traveled to another country, and we've all spent varying amounts of time abroad. So nobody didn't experience any any culture. Everyone experienced some culture shock. And it does depend where you are and a lot of circumstances of how much you'll experience. And then conflict. I tend to avoid conflict. I think it depends on your situation as well. And so we're all kind of different. We don't fit into the American man, German man. It could depend on situation, it could depend on our personalities, but there is cultural generalizations as well. And do you speak directly or around the bush? So most of us speak directly rather than indirectly. So it's interesting. It's that activities to learn about each other, but reflect on our own experiences as well. And I think that's part of cultural humility, really reflecting on, am I direct? Okay, so this student is being very direct, or the student is not getting to the point. So knowing how direct, how much I value it will help you know and understand if you're why you might be getting kind of irritated, or just to be able to compare. And you can talk about that with your students. I'm going to start the share again. Do you have any comments about the poll first, actually? Okay, so
Actually, sorry to interrupt,
yeah,
Heidi.
no problem.
Would anyone care to share just a tiny bit about what culture shock felt like to them?
Yeah,
It could be just like a sentence.
that's good, because it's good to remember that, because it helps us remember and put ourselves in our students' shoes.
Maybe a little nervousness when traveling. I haven't lived abroad, but traveled a bit. And I just remember feelings of nervousness, like what if I can't figure out where I'm going, or almost close to panic sometimes when things didn't work out the way you thought they were going to, like a train schedule or a connection to another city or something. It's like, oh my God, what do I do? So yeah, those two things.
Yeah.
You know, I've lived in a number of countries with different and maybe exotic cultures like Turkey and Thailand and others, but in the mid-70s, I lived in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zaire as it was then. We were there for 6 months and we came back, and the biggest culture shock that I've ever had has been in my own culture. Came back and all the cars were so big in New Jersey, oh my gosh, and everybody had some kind of little gadget in their hand that they were doing their arithmetic with, and we'd never seen anything like that before. And the technology had in 6 months' time just sort of overwhelmed the US economy. And another time when I was a child, I lived in a city and then we moved to the country and they had no TV, for heaven's sakes. Didn't help if you had a machine because there was no broadcasting. And that was probably that, and the isolation. There were no neighbor kids, you couldn't take the city bus to school like I did in Chicago. And that was probably the biggest cultural shock that I've experienced. And I think it's because I didn't expect it. You're going to Thailand. Oh boy, you read up all about it. And isn't that strange? And you want to respect it and stuff. And the same with any other exotic country that I've been to. You have a set of expectations because you've educated yourself, but I never expected this in my own country.
Reverse culture shock, and
Yeah.
also all the changes while you were gone. Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I was going to talk about that graph with the peaks and valleys. I lived in Peru for a year in the Peace Corps as a vintage volunteer. And, it was very hard because I was so much older than most of the other volunteers in my cohort. And so not having anybody to talk to about the things that you're experiencing. So it was kind of interesting that Peace Corps did arrange bringing all the volunteers all together at the approximations, because they can do a timeline of when, not exactly, but kind of when you're going to hit those valleys. And so they would bring us all together to have a group meeting and just have the opportunity to talk about what you're going through with other people that are sharing a similar experience.
That's interesting. It's real. They have it timed out, science to it. Anybody else?
I think one of the biggest things in the different countries I've been to has been the concept of time. Like in Africa, if somebody's in a meeting and there's another meeting, they don't leave one because, it's like whenever they happen to get there. It can be 2-3 hours late, sometimes the next day when you're out in the bush. And to learn that acceptance, because, I only have 2 weeks here, I've got to get this done and that done, and to not have the people show up. And so to really, I think I could feel it in frustrations, after the excitement and all of this is a great new culture and learning the handshake and this and that. But then, like the chart showed, the going down of the realities, it's like, okay, the frustration of trying to accomplish American things on foreign soil. In the
Well,
way. And
interesting.
that can be hard. And one of the guys, he actually came back to America with us, and I asked what he had learned. He goes, well, you all have clocks. We have time.
Oh,
And that's the type of cultural thing that I just found really impacted me as a very time-oriented, project-oriented type person.
I love that quote. You have clocks, we have times. That's something I can remind myself when students are late, or I have a clock. They have time. We're going to make it work. And I love what Lynn said too at the beginning. She said, I'd get anxious, like if the train schedule changed or something. If somebody's making this meeting last a whole extra day or overnight and you can't get back, because when we're new in some place, we don't have all the problem solving skills and we don't understand the bigger picture or the concept. Like it will be okay if one thing doesn't happen before you have to go back to the States, or if this schedule changes, we don't have all those problem solving skills. And a lot of our students are in that same boat. Like, okay, if I miss this bus, I have a smartphone, but it's not a phone. It's only, I have to have Wi-Fi. And so they don't have the cell plan. They just have Wi-Fi. And how am I going to find out the schedule, or how is this going to happen? So it's a lot harder to problem solve when you're new to a country. And that anxiety level goes up, which makes it harder to learn and remember. And so there is a lot to play in our learners. Here I am advancing the slides. I'm going back to the slide. So thoughts and observations as to why self-reflection is helpful when it comes to having cultural humility. That's one of the core values of cultural humility, the self-reflection. So why do you think it's helpful to have self-reflection?
Because otherwise you put the blame or the error on the other person. It's too easy to separate yourself from the other person rather than looking at yourself.
Way easier to blame others. And like if he says no and he is just being direct, they say, okay, in my culture, we're not that direct, but that's okay, that's just different. So being able to do that self-talk is important as well. Part 2 of cultural humility, openness to learning. Approach interactions with humility and a genuine desire to learn from others. Be open to new perspectives, experiences, and ways of thinking that may challenge your own worldview. So, in other words, be open to new perspectives. And I believe you all are. So there's some of my students. Let me see. I might go to the next slide. That wasn't it either.
Did any, sorry, did any of you get a chance to watch this TED Talk? I just finished it before we started, and I even sent it off to my husband because I thought it was so good.
Thank you. Yeah.
Did you get a chance?
Let's talk about that. What did Devut teach us? If you didn't see it, it's okay. You can still watch it later. But it blows my mind, this TED Talk, just the way he explains everything. It really was eye-opening to me. What, first of all, give me a thumbs up. Let me see if I can see everybody. Who saw it? I want to know who I'm talking to. All right, so not everyone, but some of us. So what about summarizing it real quick? What was this about? Even you don't have to summarize the whole thing. Just what is something you remember
Basically,
from the
he
video?
outlined just two schools of thought and ways to pursue life and business. And one was based on facts, and the other was based on one was about you only live one life. And the other was we have several lives. We reincarnate. So let's sit around and think about that. And the other one was very direct. It blew my mind.
Yes, yeah, so different schools of thought.
Arts made it so clear the difference between the two. And it's really matches up with what we see in class.
Yeah.
And how at the end, it's not that one is better than the other, it's that they coexist.
And just being aware that there's, right? That just the awareness really blew me away. How I can see this in male and female relationships as well.
Yeah, interesting.
I like the fact that
Versus individualist.
we tend to
Yeah,
think of,
that's what I was just gonna say, that I hadn't seen this particular differentiation, but I did a lot of work with the idea of individual versus collective societies and just how those influence the way you act in the world. And whoever just said in partnerships too, I mean, I know it's a very broad generalization, but I think that women tend to be a little more collectivist and men tend to be a little more individualist. And
Right.
anyway.
Yeah, and we can generalize. We just might need to preface generalization. Men are generally that way, and we all know there are exceptions. Yeah. But it just the thought of some guy sitting there trying to just achieve nothing, and Alexander the Great trying to conquer the world, and how different. Like, no, it should be this way. Well, why? It should be, just so different. And yeah, I loved this TED Talk just to open our eyes of, wow, there's whole different school of thought.
Can I just make a little side comment? He made a lot of references that I didn't understand in his culture. And so that made me think, am I doing that in my class? Am I making references to things that I think people understand, but they really don't? So it was a little bit of a wake up.
Yeah, wake up. It's like, do I do that? And we all know I must do that, right?
Yeah.
I definitely do that. And we're very unaware that, oh, they didn't understand. And our students might not even know they don't understand. And I'm sure I didn't understand a lot of his references, but I didn't even catch them because they were so beyond my level at that moment. But if I watch it again, and if I ever travel to India, then maybe I will.
I've really noticed that in the citizenship class when I'm teaching the students the vocabulary they need to know for the interview and the application. And I'll use examples. I'll say, well, kind of like Britney Spears, and I'll get blank look. But when I say now, when I talk about you have to give up any title of nobility that you may have had in another country. And that's a really tough one to explain because none of the students come from England, which is about, or any country that has it. So I'll make a reference to King Charles or show a picture of King Charles and Queen Camilla, and people just look at me like, what's that all about? So it's really forced me to come up with better examples.
Yeah, interesting. So anyway, it's an interesting video that you can, if you haven't watched it, it's great. But I decided I shouldn't take 20 minutes of class for us to watch it and then discuss it, although it's fun. So I'm going to share my screen again, and oops. It's part number 3 of cultural humility. Awareness of power dynamics. Recognize the power dynamics that exist within cultural interactions, including issues of privilege and marginalization. Acknowledge your own privilege and be mindful. That means 5 minutes left. Be mindful of how it may impact your relationships with others. So what does this even mean? Awareness of power dynamics, how it exists. What are our power dynamics between us and our learners?
Well, many of our students see us at a higher hierarchy than they are. They don't American think, well, where the teachers up and down. No.
It's chopping you up a lot, Gina. But many of our students, even if we don't see ourselves separate, Gina's saying, our students say, okay, that's the teacher. We must respect the teacher.
But I think that can cause some conflict with some cultures because we're also women. And there's that dynamic. And then there's the age dynamic, where some cultures honor age and others don't. So we're the teacher, but we're a woman, but we're old. And so I think it could be very, I had 8 different languages spoken in my class, so 8 different cultures. And I doubt that they all saw me in the same power situation as each other.
Yeah, even in the same class, we could be seen differently. Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you know, unless you study all of their cultures, what the power dynamics are? How do we pick up on that?
So Brandy, yes, we will have access to the PowerPoint. It's on the class website, which I'll drop in the chat too. So Deborah, that's a great question. How do we know what the power dynamics? Well, I believe in the United States and in many cultures, it's assumed the teacher is in charge. We're the ones standing at the front of the classroom, and the students in my classroom are sitting there. I make them stand up a lot though, and I sit down. It's great. The one-on-one tutoring, now that's a different story because the power dynamics could be a little different. There's not one person standing over the other person, giving homework, telling them what they want to learn. Wait a minute. How are some ways that we work together with our students so that we're not just dominating?
Listening is a really good skill for Americans or US citizens because we like.
Uh-oh. Did I close it?
Oh, I'm muted.
Oh no, I muted. Did I mute? It's like, oh no, I lost you.
Just really quick. US citizens tend to complete people's sentences and you can't wait to interject. You're waiting. So active listening is hard for us, but an example of active listening is you're silent, you're listening, and then you paraphrase. Did you just say you're interested in buying a cabinet set today? And they say yes. Like, okay, just clarifying, it's hard.
Yes, I love that Brandy's like going on to the next slide for me. Active listening. That helps change the power dynamic. Instead of telling the student what they're going to learn, asking them what they want to learn, right? So practice,
other
active,
thing-
listen.
Another thing too that I found helpful both in teaching and representing folks is to ask them about their culture. You know, how do you cook? How did you cook dinner back in your village? What did you like best about, you know, where you lived in the country? And that tends to break down some barriers.
Yeah.
I
Maybe
do
off-
that.
Yeah,
I do
maybe
that
off topic,
too.
but it really helps. And it's just fascinating. You know, you learn so much.
Speaking
I
from
agree with Sue. I have done that quite a lot. If you can, like if it's holiday time here, what are your holidays? You know, like really being interested in their culture. Family, of course, is the basic one because there's all kinds, you know, there's a lifetime worth of power arrangements and so forth in talking about your family. But as culture junkies, I just delight in that. You know, you learn so much good stuff, and they're talking to you in English. It's great.
I represented an elderly Somali woman who had clearly been fed a story, which is very common with this, you know, this is what you're going to say at your asylum interview. And I couldn't break through to her. Finally, I just started asking her about her life in Mogadishu. She said, "Oh, I just hated it when I had to move to the city. I loved the desert. I loved camel milk. You know, I loved being a nomad." And pretty soon we were able to get something a little more truthful out of her.
I was gonna say, speaking from the learner side, that active listening is so important because my host family, the mother, was always trying to figure out what I was trying to say. And so then if that wasn't what I was trying to say, then I not only had to try to say what I wanted to say, but I had to tell her she was wrong and explain that that wasn't what I was trying to say. So the listening is so key.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So we're going to continue this conversation, maybe as you write down. So awareness of power dynamics, recognize them. No, we are privileged. We're the ones that speak English, and we're teaching them. So we do have more power. We have the power of this knowledge of English that we are sharing with them. And so you guys have already shared a lot of great ways. But I want you to make a list and think for your homework of ways to shift the power dynamic with the students you work with, assuming that you have more power than the students. How are you going to make that more equal, that you will have balanced power dynamics? So that's where we're going to start on next Wednesday when we meet again. And Brandy, the slides are not yet linked to the website, but I'm going to do that right now after class. And so then you'll have access to the slides, and then the website's in the chat. Gina says she's constantly asking her students opinions about life, which is great. Yeah, I value your opinion, not just mine. So that helps shift that power balance too. And so that's part of cultural humility, just the openness to want to learn, to acknowledge I don't know it all. I haven't got my cross-cultural competency, and now I know the 24 gestures I shouldn't do or should do. But how we're going to talk about this. So we're going to go back to the airport meeting, and we're going to talk about, we're going to meet some students and talk through some scenarios on Wednesday. And so your homework is just to think about shifting the power balance to our students and us being more equal rather than us having more of that power. Any questions, comments as we close? All right, go enjoy the rest of your day. And if you have questions or comments, you can always email me. And if not, I'll just see you guys next Wednesday. It'll be the
Thank
same
you,
Zoom.
Heidi.
Thanks,
you.
Heidi.
Have a good afternoon.
You too.